welcome to Real Life and Archetypes. My name is Marina. So today I want to talk about the opposite forces of being impersonal and being emotional. This is in reference to two archetypes. One is what I call the older self. The other one is the family member, the family archetype. So it's really about the opposition and how to reconcile the emotional self that is in need of the family support and to deal with your emotions and knowing yourself. And then the other, the VIP, the older self, that is the one that is going to learn how to deal with the dimension of our experience that requires us to be more responsible, serious, more aware of the laws, the need for order, structure, and also acknowledgement of the concept of time and consequences and the weight of those things. It's also about how when we get older, we need to accumulate an experience that gives us an active intelligence, okay? That can be in the form of an expertise, for example, when you're a professional. But from the perspective of archetypes, we're talking about the universal experience. So we have to sort of take some distance from specificity in terms of forms of being, in authority and in a position of status, which is what the older self is about as well, and to look at it more from a universal perspective. So I want to talk about, the benefits or the function of that archetype, because for someone very emotional like me, I have a lot of all the archetypes, but I'm a fundamentally very emotionally driven person, and very sensitive, just very emotional. And this older self archetype is also very big in my life. But of course, because it's of the older self, it's going to take more and more space in your life and in your awareness as you get older. Okay, it's not so much when you're young. When you're young, it manifests as being very serious, feeling very restricted, because there is something in you that is in connection with that experience. You just don't really fully understand what it is about, but it does have a function. So all of the archetypes have a function. So I wanted to talk about trials. I always say that I like to watch trials. I think they are an amazing exercise for your mind, but you can also see in a trial a lot of things operating. First of all, the order in a courtroom, you can see already because there's a victim and there's a perpetrator, the concept of consequences. And, you're going to have to deal with the consequences if you're a criminal who has committed a crime and potentially being convicted and sent to prison because of that. So I was thinking about specifically a trial that I didn't watch until the end when it was the victim impact statements. I caught it late. There wasn't a live stream that was very high quality anyway, so I never went back to watch the entire trial. So this is the limit of my knowledge about this trial, which is Larry Nassar. So this was a doctor who actually committed really insidious abuse on the girls of the U.S. gymnastics team. And so the trial was several years ago. The victim impacts were really incredible, and there were hundreds of victims, and a lot of them spoke and gave their victim impact statements. And there were two phases. Phase one was with Judge Aquilina. I remember her name, and I'm sorry I don't remember the name of the second judge. And the context of why there was another session for that. But in the second session of victim impact statements, one of the fathers erupted and pounced on the convicted criminal, Larry Nassar, during the impact statements because he was listening to, it was very, very disturbing. It's an interesting thing to watch, to be honest, for those who do not have an understanding of how the lines are blurred in those criminal acts of abuse and molestations that some people do not understand when they hear statements from victims who say, well, I didn't even know that I was abused. And people have a hard time understanding that. So unfortunately, I have a knowledge of that. The thing is that, you can think in terms of you may not know that your power was taken, but you're going to feel it later. Okay, that's how you can reconcile those statements, because this guy actually did things even in front of parents who were in the room. I'm not going to give details, but this is how really insidious it can be. There were so many victims, and from a very young age, that there are specific statements, a lot of consequences. Some girls unalived themselves, unfortunately, because of the impact that this man had. But so this man, this father, he suddenly just erupted and yelled, "Give me a minute with him." And he jumped on Larry Nassar. And fortunately, to maintain order, police officers grabbed the father. The prosecutor had to speak with the members of the public who were in the courtroom, and other victims who were going to give their impact statements to maintain order and decorum of the room. This is very important in a trial, and this is part of the ritual of bringing order to things. It's a very necessary thing when you deal with a society and many people. If there is no order, everything goes out of bounds. There is chaos, such as, this action, which everybody understood emotionally and personally. But the problem is the following, and this is where I'm going with this: to have a greater understanding of the function of these two archetypes, emotions versus restriction, and respecting and obeying order, and understanding the function of being impersonal and the process of that in a trial. So imagine that somebody suddenly takes it upon themselves to exert justice individually, personally, on somebody even as horrible as this guy. So you can choose to do that. The problem is that you're going to have to face the system as well, and the consequences. And, some guys, I'm talking specifically men, because they have that kind of reaction, especially fathers. They were listening to stuff, and they just cannot wrap their heads around that stuff. And their instinct is to, defend. And their daughters, I think they also feel the fact that they failed their kids. They didn't see what was happening. They didn't know about it. And it's really tough to hear those testimonies. So you imagine, just as a hypothetical, this guy does that. He takes it upon himself. Now he's going to have to face the consequences. So maybe he will say, I'll do the time, I'll defend my daughter. Okay, in the heat of the moment, you can understand that. But the reality, now we're dealing with the archetype of the older self, the one that needs to become more aware of reality, the harsh realities of the consequences of your actions. You're going to go to prison, and then your family is going to have to deal with that. Are you really ready to do that? Is it worth it? Okay, so imagine that situation. Something happened really horrible. Everybody understands the emotional aspect of it, which is this guy, what would you do if it were your daughter, for example? That's a difficult one. Well, this is where the system comes to the rescue. Because you might say, I'll do the time, I'll do it, it's for my kid. We've seen cases like that, by the way. There are really horrible cases where, the mother, there's a very famous one, I don't remember the name, it was in Germany, and we all understand it. But the problem is the following. It's not just about doing the time, and maybe you're willing and able to do the time. Your family is going to feel the consequences of that, so that's not so great. And then there's a third aspect, which is the actual burden on your conscience of the act itself, of the deed itself. What does it do to you? And this is where the older self takes over. As you get older, for those who don't know, but those of us who have a few decades on our back, we have a greater understanding of what it feels like to not sleep well at night because of the mistakes we made, the failures, and I'm talking about normal stuff. I'm not even talking about having the burden of potentially, in this hypothetical case, doing something like that and having that on your conscience. Because people think, maybe in terms of the movies, oh, you just do that. No, it's an actual thing to have that on your conscience, okay? To how do you deal with taking somebody else's life? And I do a lot of videos about special forces and people whose job is to do that kind of stuff. It's not an easy burden to carry on you. So think about that aspect. And the reason why I want to emphasize the thought of thinking about that is to really understand what controlling emotions and being impersonal does. What is the benefit of that? You have a trial, okay? What does the process do? It removes that burden potentially from individuals taking it upon themselves to exert justice. So first of all, without due process and really looking at stuff. And when you watch trials, you realize how sometimes you may have, because of a headline or your own thoughts, some assumptions that are completely wrong. This is why we need a harsh process, objectivity, distance, and looking at the facts and reality in a way that is more thorough, more serious, and more responsible than just letting yourself be so completely biased and just driven by emotions, for example, because you see a lot of stuff that you wouldn't see if you only went by emotions, okay? So that's why I love watching trials, because I can always see how my mind is just going here and there, and oh, I made an assumption here. That's why I'm so interested in that. During the first phase of victim impact, Judge Aquilina was also referring to the defense attorneys. They were getting a lot of backlash from the public for defending a monster, okay? So she had to explain to people that this is part of what the system needs. They need to represent their client zealously. And by the way, if they don't do that, they could be disbarred, okay? So they have a responsibility to really defend their client. She also put herself in that position because she was very well liked during the process. And she said, I did the job too. I did that job. And you have to understand that it's necessary. There was, some people commenting about how the defense attorneys were harsh with some victims on the witness stand, and you can imagine how that can be very, very unpleasant and difficult for victims. But this is where learning about, the harsh reality, to be impersonal, to have more a sense of objectivity and to say, this is how it is. This is how it is. And you have to accept it and be a grown-up and accept that this is going to be difficult, because that's part of this archetype of the older self, to learn to become aware of the things that are difficult to do. And it can take many forms, whether it's, doing things, delaying gratification so that you do something for a long-term reward, or, doing things that you don't want to do. I don't want to go there. I don't want to talk to these people. I don't want to deal with that situation where you have to. You have to. It's about responsibility, the things that nobody likes to do, but you're going to have to deal with it, okay? So that's what this archetype is going to initiate us into. And we begin when we're young in many ways. We are initiated. I did a video. I'm doing commentary on Game of Thrones. And in the first episode, I talk about Ned Stark from the beginning of the show and how he, at the beginning of Game of Thrones, has to do something really difficult, which is to execute a sentence of death against a deserter. Okay, so Ned Stark has to do that, and he called upon his youngest son to witness this very difficult reality, because winter is coming and he's not a boy anymore. He has to grow up. That's what's important here. So Ned Stark, after the deed, goes to his youngest son and he wants to explain something very important, which is that he who passes the sentence has to swing the sword. So this is a way to show how Ned Stark is a really especially in Game of Thrones, quite a good example of a person of authority with, against, in contrast to others who are going to have a lot of fun doing that kind of stuff, really eliminating people who are very sadistic. So Ned Stark is an honorable man, and he's trying to explain to his son, hey, doing that, it weighs on you. It's a burden. So that's what the system is supposed to do. It's going to bring something, it's going to bring the level of impersonal, okay? The judge, it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter what her name is. Doesn't matter that it's Aquilina or somebody else. There's a judge. There's a figure of the judge. There are defense attorneys. There's a prosecution. And there is due process and a case that takes a long time, that is very difficult. The whole point of this is that at the end, you get somebody convicted or not. In this case, he was convicted and sent to rot to hell. So the system is removing that burden from the individual and emotional actions, which are going to perpetuate that cycle of burden and pain and consequences. It ends there. The system takes on that burden. That's why we need, to become aware of the virtues of impersonality and of understanding that there is a dimension of our experience that requires becoming aware of that and having the capacity to deal with objectivity and let it do its thing. It does have its value. Sometimes, especially for people like me who are very emotional, it's very difficult because we take things very personally. We feel things personally instead of taking things objectively, seriously, just from the perspective of, being objective. So is full objectivity possible? I don't know. That's not the point here. The point is to understand what is the function of one versus the other and how to dance these two together. Because of course, emotions have a function. They have a particular function of you knowing what you feel and getting to know yourself better and understanding what it is that you need so that you develop and grow and add some quality to who you are and what you do, which is that maybe you care, you personalize your experience. That has, by the way, an impact directly on your creativity, your authenticity. So it has a lot of positive things. Negatively, emotions, if you just remain in the past and you stay small, you're gonna get stuck in there. So that happens a lot. This is the feminine energy of just remaining stuck and always in the past and this and this. And you become smaller and smaller. That means when you just remain smaller, it's like you're remaining small like a child. The outside world is going to become more and more threatening to you. You're going to become more and more insecure, and that's going to reduce the scope of your experiences. That is the issue. Okay, so we can make our decisions about, not wanting to be in relationship because we don't want to have to deal with cooperation or compromise and things like that. Well, all of those decisions that are going to reduce the scope of our experience are going to have, that result that we're not going to have a fuller experience. We might make that decision, and that can be fine, but that's the result here, that you're going to have an experience that is much more reduced. So growing up and on the side of the family archetype, the one that deals with your emotions and developing maturity about your emotions, because emotions, uncontrolled or just, if you have zero awareness of what you feel, they're going to operate in a lot of ways. Even for people who fall more on the side of the older self, of the, having status, VIP, very serious. If you don't have the other side, the family archetype, so being more personal and the bounties of that, of closeness, of being more emotional without losing yourself in that, that you can pay for that too, because you just have a life that is completely, from a distance, expediency, achievement, and things like that, and you don't take care of your personal life, and things that have to do with what you feel, because what you feel can become a burden as well. Some people stay away from that. They don't want to feel because they can't handle the burden of having to take care of others, to support others, and things like that. So they're going to resort to, being on the other extreme. So anyway, I wanted to mention that because I was remembering that trial and thinking, this was such a good example. When you see that father taking action, he was not, he was just reprimanded. The judge was generous with him because she could have imposed a fine or something, or even, detain him for a while, but he apologized. And the courtroom was sort of put back in order, and people understood, don't behave that way because it leads nowhere. Now, in this case, I mean, it was not going to be a huge thing. The guy just wanted to, I don't know, maybe just punch the Larry Nassar. But anyway, it was not going to go much further than that. But I wanted to just pose that hypothesis that when we take over the action ourselves from an emotional perspective, we are going to pay dearly. And it's not just time, it's also about you're not going to sleep at night because you're going to have a burden you're not going to be able to deal with. Okay. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was interesting to you, and I'll see you next time.